History remembers Lady Caroline Lamb as the crazy lover who wouldn't leave Lord Byron, the great writer, alone after he ended their relationship. But today I want to peel back the layers and present Lady Caroline as not just a sycophantic lover who wouldn't let go, but as a real woman who loved a little too hard and perhaps lost. This is Sometimes and Forever, the podcast where we talk about romance with a healthy dose of reality. I'm Denny Downing. Welcome. Let's first of all get to know Lady Caroline a little bit better so we understand the kind of person that we're dealing with and we get some information on her background. Now, Lady Caroline Ponsonby was from a very wealthy and well-connected aristocratic family. She was in fact the niece of the famous, or maybe I should say infamous, Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire. So she was well connected. So when Caroline Ponsonby, as she was then known, got married, she married William Lamb in 1805. Now William, he had a bright future in front of him. And so I think everybody must have thought that, she has her future set. She's looking at a really rosy future. Because William is also from an aristocratic family, and he should have inherited great wealth and a title from his father. So upon his father's death, he was going to get money, lots of money, and he was also going to get his father's title. But here's the thing. Even when Caroline died in 1828, she was only 42 years old, but even up until that point, her husband still had not come into his fortune. He had not inherited anything because his father was still very much alive. So Caroline spent her whole life on the edge of privilege. She was moving among the wealthy and in all those wealthy circles, but she was never really fully secure in wealth. Let's put it that way. So her marriage to Lamb was arranged by William Lamb's mother. Now, this has control written all over it. William Lamb's mother, we can all imagine, was not going to give up her position as head woman to Caroline. And she perhaps wanted her son to marry this young girl who she thought was relatively impressionable, somebody that she could control and manage. In fact, it is reported that Caroline and her mother-in-law never had a very good relationship. They never got along. And to compound the problem, Caroline got married when she was 19 years old. Now, I know it was a thing at the time to get married when you're young. And in a way, it still is even today. But everybody knows that a 19-year-old is somebody who is just coming into their own. A 19-year-old is just starting to understand who they are, and they're starting to understand a lot of things around them. So to get married at such a young age it's something that can be very good because you grow into the marriage, but sometimes it doesn't really work because you grow out of the marriage. Nevertheless, William and Caroline had a very good marriage because they were in love. It just so happens that they were in love. And together they had 2 children. Unfortunately, their childbearing experience wasn't really a good one because their daughter died. Well, she was born dead. And the son that they had is what I guess they would call back in those days retarded. Now we say it's special needs. So their son had special needs, and that's the only child they had. But because they were so in love, they kept their son and they raised their son. It was quite a thing back then for wealthy families to send these children who had special needs away to be raised in facilities, perhaps homes or, care homes, places like that could take care of them. But Caroline and William did not do that. They kept their son and they raised him. Another thing that happened for Caroline, or happened to Caroline and her husband, was that he began to pursue a political career. And this career, it grew, it began to grow. And as it began to grow it took a toll on the marriage. And so to me, it seems like her life was one that was always on the edge of happening, but never really happened. Let me explain that to you because, sometimes we assume that because somebody is in a position of wealth and privilege that they have it all, but they don't. Not all the time. or maybe they're in such a situation that they can make anything work. No matter how bad something turns out, they can turn it into something good. That's not always the case. So here it is that we have Caroline Lamb. She's married to somebody, he's wealthy, but he's supposed to come into greater wealth and a title. But this never happened. At least it didn't happen while she was alive. It was after she died that her husband gained the title. They were supposed to have children. That was not really, I would say, maybe it wasn't as happy, or it was what is expected. Another thing is that she started to become disillusioned with society. So she started to grow up, and she started to realize that there are a lot of things in life that they're just false. They're just not really what people have been telling you all these years. And so, because of this now, her life changes. And as I said, some of the things that should have happened for her really didn't happen, at least not in the way that I suppose, like that line that people set out for you as you grow up. Her life didn't happen in a line. Then in 1812, this is when she comes more into the public eye, because this is when she meets Lord Byron. And it was in meeting him that a lot of things changed for her. So he was already a literary sensation by the time they met, and he was this dark, magnetic, kind of mysterious kind of person. And ladies, just look at his face. Isn't he handsome? He is quite handsome. I mean, just looking at him, I can see why women were falling all over themselves for him. He was quite the sensation back in England at the time. Lady Caroline Lamb, I'm going to say she was no exception to his magnetism. And she fell under his spell. In a way, she fell under his spell, but she didn't really. So let me explain. She was drawn to him. That is true. And I think the attraction was immediate. He said of her that she's clever, she's absurd, she's agreeable, she's amiable, perplexing, dangerous. These are all of the things he saw in her. And he was able to see these things, I think, because they kind of reflected who he was also. Byron himself was, I guess you would call him a tormented person. That's what I'm going to call him. He seemed to use love or his love affairs to feel whole. He's one of those persons who I don't think he really wanted or ever wants a serious relationship or a relationship that goes beyond a particular point. But he wants to be in a relationship. He wants this sort of connection. And so he has had numerous affairs. By all accounts, he's had affairs with both men and women. And he was such a scoundrel that it is believed that he actually fathered a child with his half-sister. Well, that's one for the ages. That's one for the books. Now, everybody in England, they loved him. And yet, as I said before, the fact that you have on the surface of it, you seem to have all of the things that you need, and you have all of the things that will, if you don't have everything, you have the right tools to help them to fall into place. That's not always how it is, because in his case, he had his own insecurities, because he had a father that came and went in his life. So his father wasn't, based on my understanding, wasn't a permanent fixture. He didn't really grow up with that stable father figure that he could look up to. In fact, his father had numerous affairs. His father had many debts, and his mother had to clear the debts. His mother too seems like she was an erratic kind of person. She had mood swings. She had bouts of sadness, what they would call melancholy back in the day. And get this, she was also a drinker. So with a kind of background like this, what kind of person do you think he was ever going to be? I don't think he had really good positive examples around him to show him what life should be. In addition to all of this, he had a club foot. So here it is that this really physically handsome man, brilliant of mind and relatively wealthy, has this deformity that he can do nothing about. I am sure that this clubfoot was a blow to his pride. Nevertheless, he was a sensation. So here it is that we have two people who have their own sort of trauma, and they're coming together. And they're coming together in a very intense kind of way. And their love affair was from the beginning, I believe, very strong, very intense, and it blazed for 5 months. 5 months. It is reported that they thought about running away together, but then here's the thing. I'm gonna say Byron did not have that ability to commit to anybody or anything for too long, or in a very deep way. I don't think he had that ability. And so he pulled out of this whole arrangement for them to run away together. As a matter of fact, he ended the relationship. This is where it ended. Now, this shattered Caroline, but in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, she is a married woman. She is willing to sacrifice her reputation and her standing in society, and maybe even give up her son to run away with Byron. She was prepared to just leave it all behind for this one man. He couldn't handle it. He didn't want to be in anything so deep. And so he ended it. This is the part where she starts to display attitudes that would lead to her becoming well-known, remembered for the wrong things. It is reported that she couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep. The society called her mad, and the doctors said that she was suffering from erotomania. I'm sure they're going to put a name to it. But basically what it is that she's obsessed with a man. Right? But really, when you look at it, she couldn't eat, she couldn't sleep. What is that? She's suffering from a broken heart. She loved him. It didn't work out, but she really loved him. And her heart is completely broken. She never truly got over Byron. And, not as the years passed, not after he himself got married sometime after that. As a matter of fact, when they met, this 5-month period that they had their relationship, she was 26, he was 24. He's a very young man. Of course, he's going to get married at some point. So even after he got married, she didn't let go. She herself being married didn't stop her from getting into a relationship with him. And even as he turned nasty, because he did become quite nasty in public, she still loved him. This is there's just so much going on here. So it begs the question, when does it stop being love, passion, and when does it become obsession? This relationship between Caroline Lamb and Lord Byron is a perfect example of how thin that line is between passion and obsession. At first, their passion was intoxicating. They wrote letters to each other. They wrote songs for each other. They went out together, and they made their relationship so public, so visible. But soon it was just too much. Where Caroline wanted love and to belong, Byron wanted freedom. He wanted to do his own thing. And when he withdrew, she couldn't let go. So she kept on writing to him. She sent him locks of her hair, and she even dressed as a man to enter his apartments. Now, this is just taking the joke too far. It really became embarrassing. And one night at a ball, Byron insulted her. Can you imagine that, in front of all of their friends, or all of the people who were their quote unquote friends? Now, what did she do? She broke this wine glass, and she attempted to cut herself with shards from the glass. I don't think she was really going to harm herself. She just wanted to shock him. She just wanted to show him, you are such a scoundrel, and I just know the kind of person you are. I gave you so much, and I was willing to give up even more for you, and this is what you do. She really was trying to hurt him. It's just that in trying to hurt him, she was doing something to herself, and then it comes across as her being this crazy person. But this is where I believe love stops being romantic and it starts to become unhealthy. In Caroline's case, passion turned into pain because it wasn't grounded in respect or balance. She loved Byron, but he wasn't really there for love. And that kind of imbalance made her lose her footing entirely. So this is really what happened, It's easy to forget, though, that Caroline wasn't just Byron's lover. She was, in fact, his equal in wit and intellect. She spoke Greek, she spoke Latin, she played music, she painted, she wrote poetry, and she even dabbled a little bit in politics. Remember, her husband started a political career, and after her death, he went on to become the Prime Minister of England. So there was a bit of politics in her life there as well. She claims that she's the one who actually introduced Byron to Dante. So, of course, she has a very literary mind. So she is not some crazy, dumb-witted woman who just fell under his spell and just could not let go. This is a woman who has a mind. Together, they shared a love of art. They shared a love for animals, and they had great conversations. But again, when Byron wanted to pull away, she could not bear it. She could not take it. And this kind of rejection haunted her. You know, as a matter of fact, Byron went so far as to tell everybody that he's done with her. And it was so obvious. It was so obvious with all that was happening. And yet, even as he said that, she still lingered in his own mind in the same way that he lingered in hers. So theirs was a relationship that was a lot deeper than just some superficial fling. Even though it lasted for just 5 months, it ran really deep. So this begs another question. I really have to ask, why is it that we chase the people who pull away from us? Why do we do it? I think that question is as old as love itself. Because we tend to be drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable sometimes, the ones who hurt us and the ones who keep us guessing. We tend to do that. Are we suckers for pain? I don't know. In Caroline's case, Byron's distance only deepened her desire. The less he cared, the more she needed him. And it wasn't just about love anymore. It was about being seen. And I think this is what happens a lot in relationships. When one person starts to pull away, the other person really wants to know that they mattered. They want to know that it wasn't just another empty relationship. It was something that had meaning, because it had meaning for them. So this is what's happening here to Lady Caroline Lamb. And I do think that a lot of us can relate to that. You know, maybe we don't go as far as she went. Maybe we have private moments when we really just look at what's happening, and we may even fall apart when we're all alone. But we can relate to or understand this sort of thing where we like somebody really, really, really like this person, and maybe even love this person, and the person just doesn't feel the same way. It can be really heartbreaking. My real problem with this relationship, though, is the fact that Caroline was a married woman. And I do think that as a married woman, she should have controlled herself a lot better. Back in those days, marriages, sometimes people had affairs in certain societies, and it was known, talked about, but it was always hush-hush. But her going so far with this affair, it just looked bad. It looked really bad. And for me, I really don't think she should have engaged in the affair anyway. That's my judgment of her. That's where I'm going to judge her. I don't think that people who are married should have extramarital affairs. It's just wrong. And see, somebody always gets hurt in these things. And here it is that Caroline is the one who has the most hurt. Most biographers paint Caroline as this hysterical, dramatic, even unstable kind of person. But there is more to it, because she lived a life on her own or of her own before Byron came along, and she had a life after he left. Her writing career flourished after Byron left, and this is perhaps how I want to remember her, not as a crazed, abandoned lover, but as a writer, as a woman who had a successful writing career. In 1816, she published Glenarvan, which was a novel that scandalized London. It was a thinly veiled retelling of her affair with Byron, and it also was a satire of London society itself. London society, when people read it, a lot of people recognized themselves in what she wrote, and they were so pissed off. They were so mad at her that they ostracized her from society. Some people said it was revenge, that she was, taking revenge on society. And a lot of persons said it was complete madness. But really, it was her telling everyone what she really thinks of them. This was her saying to society, this is who I see you as. This is how I see you. She once wrote that everybody wishes to run down and suppress the vital spark of genius I have. I am not vain, believe me, nor selfish, but I am independent. That's not the voice of a mad woman, is it? Isn't it more the voice of a woman fighting to keep her sense of self? After Byron left England, he actually did leave England because he too, just like his father, ran up a lot of debts. He had a lot of affairs, and with all of that scandal around him, he ran away and he left England. And after he left England, this is when Caroline really came into her own, and she published even more novels. She published parodies and songs, and she even kept a diary that she had planned to publish one day. But the truth is that her reputation was sealed. She became a cautionary tale. She was this woman who lost her mind for love. Yet the truth is she was more than that. She was a writer. She was a mother, and one of the few women of her time who dared to tell her own story. And I think this is why a lot of people tend to look at her as so crazy, because she dared to say how she felt. She lived loudly in a world that valued women who were quiet. This is Victorian England. And maybe that's why she's still fascinating even today. Lady Caroline Lamb was passionate, she was complicated, and I dare say way ahead of her time. She was a woman who refused to be silent even when it cost her everything. Her husband, in case you're wondering, he was encouraged by those close to him to divorce her, but he didn't. He didn't do it because he understood her. He understood her more than anybody else. But do not be mistaken. He had his own affairs as well. So I think both of them knew each other really well, and perhaps their marriage was a lot more. It was the powerful connection that she was looking for with Byron. Only that Byron had this certain secret sauce. He had this kind of freedom about him that perhaps her husband didn't really give her, that kind of vibe he didn't give her. But I do think that she and her husband had a really good, I'm not going to say they had a good marriage, because he was having affairs, she had her affairs, or at least this love affair with Byron. You know, she wasn't afraid to write and to tell people what she thought about them. But still, they stayed together. He did not divorce her. She once described Lord Byron as mad, bad, and dangerous to know. Yes, she's the one who came up with that descriptor of him. And perhaps that description belongs to her as much as it ever did to Byron. This has been Sometimes and Forever. Thank you so much for listening and for spending some time with us. I am Denny Downing. Thank you for listening.